We will begin the webinar shortly. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sharon Roberson. I am the president and CEO of the YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee. We are so excited to relaunch our Stand Against Injustice webinar series with this incredibly timely and critical conversation on racism as a public health crisis. As many of you are aware, the mission of the YW is eliminating racism, empowering women, promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. The reason that we have this webinar series is we believe that through these constructive community conversations, we can bring our community together in a very healthy fashion. We always say we invite you to these conversations. We do not indict you, but we are hopeful that those who may differ from our opinions or opinions of our webinar series or the information may learn nuggets that will help them bring our community together in a better fashion. As we gather today, our community continues to face the harsh realities of racism that deeply affects both mental and physical health. Recent activities in our community, very unfortunate, the Nazi marches here and the hate speech that continues to be very pervasive in the community. We have an urgent need to address these issues because unfortunately, these issues affect a large portion of our community very harshly. Today's conversation brings together a panel of thought leaders who will dive into the multifaceted ways that racism impacts individuals and communities, from mental health struggles to the long-term physical effects of systemic discrimination. These experts will help us better understand the deep-rooted harm of racism and share insights on the steps we can take towards healing. This webinar also serves as a precursor to our annual Stand Against Injustice Rally and Advocacy Fair, which will take place next Thursday, September 26th, at the historic Metro Courthouse. Our theme this year for our rally is Healing Through Unity. This emphasizes the need for us to come together as a community to address racism and injustice as a public health crisis they are. We are thrilled to have Katina Beard, who is the CEO of Matthew Walker Comprehensive Health Center, as our keynote speaker for our rally next week. So we hope to see you there. Additionally, just this past Thursday, September 17th, Councilwoman Toombs introduced Metro Council Resolution RS 2024-727, formally declaring racism as a public health crisis in our city. This is a powerful step forward in acknowledging and addressing these issues. I also want to take time to thank the generous support of the Harnish Foundation and Alliance Bernstein for supporting this vital work. Without their partnership, conversations like this would not be possible. With that, I'm excited to begin today's discussion, and thank you again for joining us. And as I said before, I hope you find today's conversation both enlightening and empowering as we continue working together to dismantle racism and build a healthier, more just community. I will now ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and brief introduction and let us know how what they do fits into the space of this conversation. I'll start with Tené Franklin.
Good afternoon, everyone. And Sharon, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this inspirational panel. My name is Tené Franklin, and I am the principal and founder of Hamilton Franklin Strategies, LLC, where I work with organizations to advance their strategies with regards to community engagement and racial health equity strategies. I'm also chair of our local board of health, where I have the opportunity to work with and interface with those that are on the front lines that are working in this space on a day-to-day basis. But professionally, I sort of find myself in these spaces because I started my career off as a genetic counselor, kind of backdoored into public health and also into policy. And regardless of what I do, health outcomes is always important. And when we examine our health outcomes, we often disaggregate the data based on race and identifying the health disparities that predominantly affect people of color, i.e. African Americans and Latinx community members. So with that, in terms of strategies to improve health equity, I find myself in these conversations in race and racism on a regular basis. But it's good to be here with you all.
Well, thank you so much. Dian Allan Rob, and I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, indeed. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dian Allan Rob. I serve as the Assistant Bureau Director for Population Health at the Metro Public Health Department. I like to say I really have the honor of serving with 133 problem solvers and critical thinkers who are committed to health equity and justice for Davidson County residents. We approach our work with strategic use of data and storytelling and identifying interventions that work and taking them to scale. I came into public health and how I came into this focus on equity really started in my childhood. I noticed that people who looked like me, who could have been members of my family, seemed to experience illness and death more often than, let's say, family members or of my friends, or some of my white friends that I grew up with. And that curiosity led me through college, and it led me into graduate school to pursue my master's degree in public health, and ultimately into local public health, where I've remained for the past 18 years. Most of my service has been in Davidson County as a Davidson County resident, trying to identify opportunities to make improvements in maternal and child health specifically. It is also great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Maryam Abdallah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mariam Abdulla. I'm the Chief Wellness Officer for I Am Well Consulting, where I practice as a mental health therapist and consultant, and manage a fabulous team of therapists that do work to help our community become whole. And so I Am Well Consulting was built on the premise that we have to work from the inside out. And so knowing that we need to align mind, body, and soul to be healthy, to be whole, that's where I feel like the work connects. The mental health work, which is typically seen as individualized, and it is. That's where it starts, but then it moves out. So if we are well with ourselves, then we are good with our families. If we are good with our families, we are good with our communities, and the circle gets bigger and bigger. And so we are each helping to make a healthy and whole community, state, and world. And so I've been doing this work for 20 plus years as a licensed clinical social worker. I also do a lot of advocacy and advocacy around mental health awareness and access to mental health awareness service or mental health services, particularly in our Black and Brown communities, as well as our LGBTQ communities, focusing on healing from trauma. And so we know that our Black and Brown communities, as well as our LGBTQ communities, have suffered a lot of trauma and are suffering a lot of trauma. And a lot of it is rooted in society and things that are happening. And so I love doing that work. That's at the heart of not only the mental health piece, but just the giving back, the helping us all become a better, healthier society. And so I'm grateful to be here with the other panelists. I'm grateful to be able to share in this very, very important conversation.
Thank you. For those of you who may not be as familiar with the YWCA, our largest programming is providing domestic violence services. And that could be of anyone, female, male, Black, white, doesn't matter, transgender, it could be any group in our society, very important. But one thing in doing domestic violence work is you understand how trauma does affect behavior, how trauma affects your health. And one of the reasons we're having this conversation is because there's a lot of emphasis played on domestic violence and how that trauma carries over into your life. But often we don't look at racism as a trauma-inducing part of our society. And that's why it's very important for us to understand racism in the same way that we look at domestic violence as far as how it affects those who are subject to it. And so we're talking about racism as a public health crisis. And it's not just a social issue. And some people look at racism as really that sort of simple, it's a social issue. And it is truly a public health crisis. Research in epigenetics shows that chronic stress from racism can alter gene expression, leading to increased risk of depression, anxiety, hypertension, diabetes, and even infant mortality. And we talk about things such as micro and macro aggressions, which hopefully our panelists will touch on. And then we look at the public face of it having to be faced daily with not only regular media, but social media, and how that adds an extra level of depression or stress on our system that could lead to depression. As Nashville searches for its next health director, it is crucial to understand that racism is a public health crisis that affects us all. Our local initiatives, such as the Metro Bureau of Health Equity, founded in 2021, and organizations like Black Mental Health Village, the Tennessee Justice Center, Nashville Cares, are working tirelessly to address these issues. Now let's move to the panelists. I'll start with you, Ms. Abdullah. I'm getting it wrong. Abdulla. I would like for you to look at how racism impacts different age groups from children to adolescents to adults in terms of their health and well-being.
Thank you. So racism impacting different age groups, it shows up differently. So the impact is, the outcome probably is the same, but the way it shows up in each of those age groups may vary. And so when you're thinking about racism, when you start with our babies, and I would even say start with our babies in the womb, if you have a mother carrying a child that has a lot of stress, that is overwhelmed, that is depressed, that has any type of mental health conditions happening, that is transferred to the baby. And so that's number one. So then you have a child that's born that has already picked up some of these anxious and mental health precursors, I would say. And so then when you move into toddler and young children, that's the most foundational stage, developmental stage for children. And so we know that everything that is happening around us, whether it's happening to us or not, if it's happening around us, if we see it directly or indirectly, it affects us. And so we take it in, we absorb it. We may not respond to it in that moment. We may not react to it in that moment. It may be years later when we, are saying, I don't feel good about myself. I'm not confident. I'm not pretty because of some of the things that I have heard, maybe from classmates, maybe from teachers, maybe from neighbors. whatever. So in your the young children, that's the most crucial space. That's where we need to make sure that we are uplifting and loving on and nurturing and speaking positivity, not negativity or negative things, because that will carry with them, and then they'll show up that way in their adulthood. And so then you think about teenagers or adolescents, same thing. So that's a important time where you are self-identifying. And so if racism is playing a part in your teen years, then it makes it hard for you to really identify and show up confidently as who you are authentically supposed to be. And so you may do things different to your hair. You may wear different clothes. You may start to dim some of the things that are positive about you, because society says, no, you shouldn't talk that way, or you shouldn't wear your hair that way, or you shouldn't look that way. And so then we try to do things as teenagers to fit into mainstream or fit into what pretty much white society says is appropriate. And so that's what's happening as a teenager. And it's already hard to be a teenager to begin with, but then you couple that with racism or discrimination or peer pressure to be something that you're not. And then we move to adulthood, where we know, again, all these other stages of life have occurred. And so now we're an adult trying to figure it all out. You know, why do I look this way? Why do I sound this way? Why didn't I get that job? Oh, next time I'll talk differently. Next time I'll wear my hair straight. Next time I'll, talk to the person that already works there so I can see if I can get ahead. All these things are compounded by the time we become adults. And then it's just, if we haven't addressed it along the way, if we don't have parents, or if we don't have mentors, or we don't have advocates or allies in our village or our community to help us understand that who we are is who we are supposed to be, and it is wonderful, then we are struggling to do that as adults, which thankfully, we have a lot of resources when we become adults to reach out to mental health professionals, people to surround ourselves with, to combat some of that racism. But at that point, it is, again, so compounded that that's what causes a lot of the mental health issues that we are battling. So self-sabotage and lack of confidence, and all of those turn to stress and anxiety. And then that can even lead to depression. Then that can lead to suicide, which we know this is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And so really understanding that, yes, it may start off as somebody speaking against you negatively around your color or your race, but then it can end up in death if it's not addressed somewhere along that cycle of life, and really understanding how much it affects us, whether it's because of physical health problem that we end up with, hypertension, heart disease, or it's because we don't feel like we're enough and we die by suicide. So I think if that summed it up kind of across the span of our life and how racism can affect us from birth to adulthood.
Okay, Ms. Allen-Robb, the same question, but do you have anything to add? Because we were looking in that discussion about how children starts as children, all of us have been children, then we get a little bit older and older, and I see now how we're starting the discussion about how you carry that weight, and then we have adults and we're just lost. Can you give us a little bit more to that?
Sure, and thank you. And I am gonna piggyback off of what has already been stated, because it was such a beautiful through line. A part of the lens that we use in public health and understanding impacts of racism is really from a physiological standpoint. And for those folks, because we are in a virtual environment, I'm just going to ask you to indulge me. I want you to take your fist, any fist. I just want you to clench your fist as tight as you can, and I want you to hold it as tight as you can for as long as I'm talking. Okay, so that's your assignment. Just hold. Hold. Keep your hand up. I see you. Keep your hand up. Hold your fist as tight as you can. So understanding kind of the physiological impacts of racism, and also it's a part of that power analysis, right? That racism is kind of the racial prejudice plus the misuse of power by institutions and systems, and that That misuse of power can be intentional and unintentional. I'm going to use unintentional in air quotes. But the idea is that the physiological response is the same. The body perceives these threats. It is triggered by these threats, and there is a physiological response. There's the release of all of the stress hormones, the flight, freeze, fight response, right? All of those things get triggered whether you are fully aware of them or not. And the idea is that that constant and sustained physiological response over time, there's a name for that. It's called the weathering effect. Our great researcher Geronimus and the work of Geronimus in terms of over time, there is a decline in health and health potential because of the physiologic response to that threat. Weathering looks like, in Black female bodies, in particular Black birthing bodies, it looks like those health statistics around premature babies and low birth weight babies and women dying during pregnancy and up to a year after pregnancy. We call that maternal mortality. It looks like Black babies dying before their first birthday. We call that infant mortality at rates that are 2.5 times higher than for other racial and ethnic minority groups, particularly in Davidson County. In children, and I'll just keep holding your fist, I will call out, right, you may have heard the story this morning, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, and her call for information around how Black girls are treated in our public education system. Again, the misuse of power and institution and systems that Black girls, their suspension rates are 7 times higher, 4 times higher for arrest. And even though Black girls only make up about 20% of the student population, they comprise 50% of, right, those kind of disciplinary actions. It's been called out that in adolescence, this looks like higher rates of homicide and suicide and poor mental well-being. And in Black women, very interesting study, our colleagues at Harvard in 2017, it was Scholar Krieger, who noted there were higher rates of estrogen negative breast cancer. And this is a particular interest to me because of the people who were in my circle. But a part of their work looked at women who had a current breast cancer diagnosis and current as of through 2012 in their retrospective study, that being born in a Jim Crow state, you weren't born during a time of Jim Crow, but if you were born in a Jim Crow state, you had a heightened risk of developing a breast cancer tumor that was associated with a poor diagnosis. The point of all of this is to say, how many of you is your fist hurting a little bit? Are you ready to put your fist down? Okay. This is what our bodies are doing in response to perceived threats. And I would argue, and we've had other scholars who will argue, that rapid aging and deterioration of our tissue happens under extreme stress. People that are living through wars are physiologically aging faster. People in the United States that are experiencing racism are physiologically aging faster. You can put your hand down, because if you had to live every day with your fist as tight as it was for the few minutes that I was speaking, and actually this is what is happening at the cellular level, this is how we understand the impact of racism at the public health level. It's the physiological changes that are happening in people's bodies that are resulting in the kind of data and statistics that we are seeing. And where is the power being misused in these systems that needs to be corrected?
All right, thank you. Okay, Ms. Franklin, can you discuss the role of epigenetics in understanding the long-term health impacts of racism on Black individuals?
Okay, so just to build on the conversation, we just experienced the short-term effects. My hand still hurts.
I know.
It's still tight. But when we think about epigenetics, there is evidence, there is scientific evidence that this change does happen at the cellular level. And so epigenetics is a mechanism by which environmental factors such as childhood stress, racial discrimination, economic hardship, and depression can affect gene expression without altering the underlying gene sequence. So it's not like you have a mutation per se, but it's how the gene is expressed or how it is not expressed. Sometimes a gene expressed a certain way can lead to susceptibility of disease like cancer, or if it's not expressed, it could remove that protective factor. So that's where we sort of understand that. And we talked about different examples, but pain is one of those examples of where epigenetic changes can actually impact individuals, particularly Black people, African Americans, as the research studies, because because of that trauma that we have, largely based on not just traditional racism, but the interactions of racism. Sharon, you had mentioned before microaggressions, macroaggressions. Even if me as a Black woman, I might not experience that, my friends might come to me and say, listen, this is what happened at work, and I'm so stressed and I'm so tired of having to live in this space as a Black woman. She's going to talk to me and download with me. And that is going to happen more times than not because she's comfortable coming to me as a fellow Black woman. So it can impact you individually on a firsthand basis, but we're also talking about a community response to this trauma that is how we understand racism.
All right, it's almost like vicarious macro and microaggressions, but let's go back to the subject. Ms. Abdallah, can you elaborate on how, going back to the microaggressions and macroaggressions, how these impact, go a little further deeper into that, the mental health of, let's use a broader term, of BIPOC individuals, Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Yeah, and so I think thinking about micro and macroaggressions, I think when you hear it, if you're not a part of the BIPOC community, when you hear it, I think it's, oh, something happened and their feelings were hurt and they probably have moved on. But when you think about micro and macroaggressions, I would say that we have to think about it being rooted in historical trauma. And so it's not just, again, today, this is what was said to me, but it is a generation before me and a generation before them and so forth and so forth. So many generations built on racism that transfers. As I said earlier, this trauma has been transferred from generation to generation in Black and brown bodies. And so when I feel like someone says something at work, oh, you're, smart, or you're professional for a Black woman, or, oh, you're so professional, like I couldn't be for some reason, then I'm supposed to just take that, put it away, and move on with my day. But what happens is when that is happening over and over and it's compounding, it's building up in you. Again, you may not even realize it, but subconsciously, then you're showing up like, oh, I probably shouldn't show up that way because last time they said something about, me, or maybe I shouldn't speak so loudly because last time they said that they felt like I was angry, or, these things that happen a lot of times in the professional setting in workplaces, but it can happen in educational settings, as I think Deanna or somebody just talked about around the young children. So our Black girls, the way they are being treated disparately as compared to the white counterparts. And so it could be work, it could be the education system. Unfortunately, it could be our own communities saying, you have to do this or this will happen. And so when you are hearing all these things, they are compounding. And over time, again, that's where we have a break. It's just like all of a sudden, then I really am angry. And then all of a sudden, I really am frustrated. And then it comes out in a way that we don't necessarily want it to come out. And as one of the panelists was sharing earlier around the stress response. And so, yes, at that point, your stress response has no control, no regulation. It is over the top and everything comes out. And then that just makes it worse. It makes it hard for us to get back to our baseline, back to our normal functioning, back to where we can show up in a healthy emotional state for ourselves. And so when you talk about even Black women, but even Black men, I think it's coupled with the pressures of showing up and being and taking care of our families and our communities. And so something that also is rooted in historical trauma. So it's things that were built as mechanisms, so defense mechanisms, even when we're talking about slavery times, like if the husband and the wife are separated, then as the woman, yes, I have to show up, have to take care of the kids, I have to work in the fields, I have to take care of the house, I have to do all these things to survive. And then as the husband, yes, I have to make money, I have to be there for my family. And if I don't, I'm this failure. I haven't done what I'm supposed to do, but so much so to the detriment of each of those roles. So as a woman and as a man, you again, can lead to mental health issues that then lead to depression, that then can lead to suicide, because you just feel hopeless in the way you're supposed to show up. And we don't give ourselves grace because we weren't taught to do that. And so people walking around again in society that aren't Black and brown, it's hard for them to understand the impact and how big it is on Black and brown people when you're taking in these things that seem micro or macro, whatever you want to call it. Either way, it seems small, and it's really not small. It's an internal heavy weight that is carried, as we just were demonstrated with the clenching of our fists. When you're in survival mode, your fists are clenched, your shoulders are clenched, your jaws clenched, your body, your whole body. So think about walking around, going to work. Already your body is tightening up as you go into work. Think about coming home to take care of your family. You can't, pay the bills. You're already tense and tightening up. Think about going to school where the teacher is picking on you. You're already tense. You're already tight. And so you're walking around like that. Your body doesn't even know what normal looks like at this point. And so you're just used to walking around in that way. I have to tell myself often throughout the day to breathe and let my shoulders down, because for some reason, and then I have to backtrack through the day to say, why did I end up in that posture? Oh, that happened, or that person said that. So let me process that and let it go. But unfortunately, we're not taught to do that. But we wouldn't have to be taught to do that if we could work on how people are treating people in society and causing some of this stress, or a lot of this stress and anxiety in our bodies.
Yes. Yes. And oftentimes I know we talk about things that are systemic racism. And once you really start developing your knowledge of how that works and how our systems that are put in place through, I guess, the American way, so to speak, actually can have a very detrimental effect. And I want Ms. Allen-Robb to speak to this issue of why it is so important for systems like our public health leaders to understand and prioritize addressing racial health disparities.
Yeah, thank you. And potentially, my future boss may see this webinar, and I hope that they do, and I hope that they take what they're hearing under consideration if they're not coming already equipped as they should. I will say, again, a part of the public health role in addressing the impacts of racism is understanding that power analysis and where that power is being misused within institutions and systems. Public health in any community is the chief health strategist. It is the individual, the part of the system that is saying, these are the steps that we need to take as a larger community to ensure that people are living longer, healthier, better quality of life. And a part of that role is also the political negotiation, that I'll say that in a kind of a nice way, that has to happen within these systems in terms of speaking truth to power, but also knowing where the levers are to shift the use of that power in a way that is not harmful. I'm not under the illusion that we are going to dismantle all of these systems, dismantling an education system, dismantling a healthcare system, so on and so forth. And that's not necessarily the expectation that I have of our public health director. The expectation that I do have, and I hope that all of you have, in terms of being residents in Davidson County, is that person is actively working with community members, community organizations, working with the board to find out where those levers are within systems to help shift the power away from doing harm to people to help leveraging health for people.
Yes. All right, Ms. Franklin, talk a little bit about that. How do we prioritize addressing racial health disparities? We know that the disparities exist, but why is it important for our public health leaders to understand this?
So, so let me start by saying, I don't know if we should prioritize focusing on disparities per se. And the reason I say that is because we have been focusing on disparities for well over 30 years. I believe it was 1986 that the Heckler report came out, that from HHS, that essentially highlighted that health outcome differences based on race between African Americans and Caucasians. And since then, we have broadened that disaggregation of our health outcomes and public health outcomes data to include Latinx and Asians and really all race and ethnicities here in the United States. But we have been focusing on those disparities and it has not gotten us anywhere. We know the root cause of disparities are what we talk about with epigenetics. That means the environment in which people live and work and congregate and go to school, and those social factors associated with that. So I would say, let's not focus on the difference in health outcomes. What are the systems and what are the opportunities that we can avail to everyone, regardless of race or ethnicity, that we know is needed in order to have optimal life? That's what the focus should be. In order to do that, you can't be afraid to talk about race. You just can't be afraid to talk about race. And, I understand that we have to meet people where they are, but at the end of the day, there are differences, whether or not there are differences between individuals that identify as male or female, young people and our elders, and based on our lived experience. If I lived in a rural community versus growing up in New York City, there are differences that we bring to the table, and that's okay. But we cannot avoid talking about race if we want to create opportunities for optimal health for everyone.
So you're looking at going backwards, looking behind. It's almost as if the disparities are the result, but you want to look at what caused these results. We're just focusing on the results and acknowledging those, but you're going behind that. That's a very, very important perspective.
Yeah, and let me add to that. There is, and I'll drop it in the chat in just a moment, there is a study that the American Cancer Society is doing called Voices of Black Women. And that study it's a 30-year cohort study and it's not invasive. They're just asking Black women between the ages of 25 to 55, tell us about your life. Tell us about your income, education. Tell us about the experiences that you have with race, your family, so forth and so on. Because we know that disparities, the outcome differences are there. We're trying to understand why. And so we can be more strategic with regards to and prescriptive to stopping that dis-ease before it happens. And so the only way you can do that is go upstream to identify the root causes. So we know epigenetics is there, but what causes those changes in gene expression? That's the question we should be asking. What causes it and why, and what we can do to stop it.
All right. Very, very good. Okay. Ms. Abdallah, I want to get to a recent incident that happened in Nashville. It was so disturbing to me. I thought about it for days after, where the young children were harassed by the racists in our city. And I did note that many community leaders offered their support. But what I want to know is, what can you add to this? What should we do when our children are harassed and they suffer really racial trauma? What can we do to sort of get them back on track, to help them sort of understand how to deal with this, because it was probably much more traumatic than we thought, because those things have a lingering effect.
Yes, absolutely. And just like you as a mother, yes, my heart was
I
broken.
know.
And the community showing up and advocating for them absolutely was needed in that moment. And I'm glad that there were people that were able to do that in the moment. I would say probably a piece of that then includes kind of the whole answer really is it takes a village. So it takes
Yeah.
all of us, and it's not just that saying that we love to say. It really takes everybody in those children's lives, our children's lives, all the children. It takes everybody to play a part in that. And so I would start with just validating how they were feeling, whatever they were feeling in that moment, however they felt about it, whatever their emotions were, making sure that somebody, hopefully somebody was saying, absolutely, we hear you. Your emotions are valid. You can have those emotions, allowing them to sit in those emotions, not trying to rush them past it, not trying to get them, okay, hope you feel better and move on. It is let them sit in and really feel what they were feeling so that they're able to process it. And so when you talk about emotions, a lot of times the big emotions or the hyper emotions, most of us don't like. And so we try to rush through them. We try to get over it. We try to move past it, but we really need to sit in them so that we understand. That's where we start to say, you know what? That comment is not okay. And so as a young child, they know that that's not okay. People cannot treat me that way. That hurt my feelings. I understand that. And then once you allow them to sit in it and validate them, then you give them a space to release it. How can I release these emotions in a safe way, in a safe space? That's where it starts to go out to our communities. Do we have community centers? Do we have resource centers that are safe, that our children know, you know what, I can go to a support group, or I can go to a play date, or I can go, do some spoken word. Like, do we have safe spaces in our community that then allows them to release in a positive way, release those emotions in a positive way? And then I would say, lastly, it's kind of coming back to where we started, that is making sure that everybody in the community knows the part that they play. So as the teacher, I'm asking, are you okay? How are you feeling? Really understanding what is happening in my students' world outside of them coming to class and maybe acting out or not doing their work. What's happening in their world at home. And so then also it plays the part of, the neighbor. We are not as close as we used to be when we were able to have a village, but checking on your neighbors. If you see kids in the neighborhood, just speaking and saying hello, how are you? That says there is a connection between young and our older, more mature adults, because sometimes children don't feel safe because it's like, nope, it's an adult. You can't talk to them. You can't ask them anything. You can't question them. And so really bridging that gap to say, no matter how old you are, if we're in this community together, we're trying to take care of each other. And so giving that support and showing that support however we need to. So I will say a number of things: validating, making sure you're validating their feelings, making sure you're creating safe spaces for them to be able to show up in those emotions. And then all of us learning what is our, what part do we play in this? How can we help encourage our young people to be healthy and to know that they are amazing just as they are. And so that those affirmations. And so that's what I would say. But it's still, again, that still kind of breaks your heart to hear. But if those things are happening, that makes me feel, if I know those things happen, I feel better about the chances of that young person, again, growing up to be a more healthy adult.
Yeah. And I'm going to go back a little bit more to this question, because I will tell you this, because we support children who have gone through trauma of domestic violence, and our data will show that typically the people that come for our support in the form of our Weaver Domestic Violence Center are children of color. And there's a lot of anger associated with that. You add DV and layer it with racism, you kind of have a tough situation. And a lot of people don't understand the anger. I truly, and I hate to say it, I truly understand their anger, because some of the things that people say to these children, labeling them as bad, labeling them as the problem, really angers me too. And I'll start with you, Ms. Allen-Robb. How do we get past that anger, which to me is not, it's a response, I know, but it's not a totally irrational response. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but it's not, to me, that irrational for those children to feel anger. I think that we need to work how you get beyond that, but let's talk about that, a normal response of anger, because I see every other group of individuals being able to express their anger when they are slighted, but why is that difficult? What can we do?
Yeah, I think that um gosh, there's so much there's so much here. What's coming to my mind is also the work of Dr. Kamara Jones in her time as a scientist, data scientist at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, in her Gardner's Tale allegory, which, it's been around for the better part of 10, 15 years. But if anybody's not familiar with it, certainly encourage you to do a quick search of it, and I'll also drop it in the chat box. It's this idea of kind of this preference and what a reaction that you prefer. You prefer a reaction from a young person or from a child. And if that child happens to be white, that reaction is much more acceptable and it's understandable, and that child needs love and support and needs services and needs to be connected to all of the resources. And if that exact same reaction happens from a Black child, that Black child is a threat. That is aggressive behavior that needs an aggressive response rather than a loving and sensitive response. And a part of that comes from our racialized socialization that we were all brought up to think and that we still subconsciously carry with us. And it takes a lot of effort to take a step back and say, again, it's that idea around adverse childhood experiences and adverse community experiences, and asking the different question of not what's wrong with you, but what has happened to you. Something happened that caused this particular reaction. I'm driving down the I-24, shout out I-24, y'all. I'm driving down I-24, somebody cuts me off, I'm going to be angry. I'm going to grip the steering wheel, right? If I have a passenger in my car and that passenger sees me gripping the steering wheel, they're going to say, hey, what just happened? You went from being happy and singing songs to all of a sudden now you're gritting your teeth and gripping. They're not going to say necessarily, child, what's wrong with you? They're going to say, what happened? Like, what happened, right? So what happened was somebody cut me off, and my anger is a completely natural response to what just occurred. And I'm going to try to find a way to regulate myself in the moment. Young people need our support to help regulate those emotions, but they need validation of the thing that happened. And our job as community, everybody on here, is to, as much as we can, stop those things from happening. There are preventable things that we can stop from happening that our kids are not exposed to at all. I'll pause there.
All right, Ms. Franklin. Let's get over the anger issue, because I think that anyone that has navigated through this American society as a person of color, and especially a woman of color, has been subjected to what people view as, you're too angry, you're too hostile, you're mean. And, if they knew, I always say, if they knew you as a child, they would understand why your patience is thin as you get older and you cross over that old like me. You start thinking, I'm just not going to do this anymore. I'm just not going to take this. I'm going to start, you have the older people that speak their minds. There's a reason for that. Mm-hmm. Talk about it to me, Ms. Franklin.
So, yeah, so that's real. And I'm thinking about my mother and then my journey. And then I have two daughters. And so all of us relate to this particular experience of race and racism in different ways. And we're all on our different journeys at different points in our life. But I'll add to this. I think it was Ms. Stockton that put in the chat that it's important that we have the space to feel what we're feeling. And I think a lot of times having either formal affinity groups or informal affinity groups in the workplace creates that safe space to just go and not be judged, or at least feel as if you're not going to be judged. I know that personally, I have chosen to pick my battles. There are things that I am going to advocate for because I know that I have the power and it's the right thing to do. And it's also strategically, it makes sense. But then I will fall back in order to protect my health, my mental health. And I mean that literally. And it goes back to those epigenetic changes, those physiological changes that Deanna was talking about, because this can make us sick, right? Talking about race, advocating against racism, and then holding space for people, for our community members and people that we are near and dear, that makes a difference. But I just want to pivot really quickly. So I joined the Board of Health, I believe, Deanna, was it 2019? I think it was 2019. And when I joined the board, there was someone, first of all, I said, I'm going to ask questions about racial health equity, and that's going to be my role. So I'm always going to be data-driven and ask those questions. So I got over that racial anxiety piece. But one of the things that individuals in the department came to me and they said, we want a resolution. We want the board to have a resolution with regards to health equity. And so I said, that sounds great. Get us started. But that health equity resolution, and I'll share it in just a moment, happened because there were people in the public health department that had the lived experience with regards to racism, microaggressions, that said, we need to make a difference and we need the board's voice to validate this space for us to move forward as a department and as a community. So we had that resolution in 2019. So those are the little things that keep moving us forward. And because of that, we had the Health Equity Bureau, and now we don't have the Health Equity Bureau, we have the People and Culture Bureau, because it's not the responsibility of one department or one section in the workplace or one person to hold space for the racial health equity strategy. At the health department, it is permeated through all of our programs and all of our operations. And so going back to Deanna, what you're talking about, having a leader that is open and understands why this is important. If we can't do the work internally, exercise that internal muscle, then we're not going to be able to exercise that external muscle. And I'll stop there.
All right. Ms. Abdallah, we have sometimes at the YW, we have what we call circles, and we have these open conversations, and some organizations, you know, they started down that path. I mean, for-profit corporations, and they sort of pulled back. But when I was in the corporate world, I found it very, very helpful to have these conversations, because until you verbalize your experiences, sometimes your coworkers have no understanding of that experience and how it's so important for them to have a broader understanding of you. Give us a little bit more of that. How can these sort of public forums or even small corporate groups getting together and discussing these issues prove helpful to an individual who has had racial trauma?
Yeah, so we know, I mean, number one, I would say the reason I have a job, psychotherapy, which is talk therapy, it really is about talking it out. So talking is powerful. It puts it into the universe, it puts it out into the atmosphere, and it helps someone that doesn't look like you or hasn't had that experience or doesn't feel like you or doesn't understand. It helps them be able to start to listen, understand, validate, care about another person that's opposite of them. And so talking circles, healing circles, support groups, group therapy, it puts you in a space of, number one, peer peer groups that are like-minded and that can relate. So for the person, it says, I'm not alone. Like, I'm not the only person that has felt this way at work. I'm not the only person, the only mom that has felt this way in parenting. I'm not the only, father that has felt like I let my family down. I'm not the only one, so I'm not alone. So that's what it does for the individual. And so when you think about the whole, especially when you're talking about professional spaces where supposedly we come to work, and we do. We come to work to be productive. But if you want me to be productive and to show up and to be a benefit to you, then you have to also pour into me and help me be a better employee. And that means providing emotional wellness spaces for me. And that's those affinity groups, those employee EAP assistants, that saying we have, mental health resources for you. We have a training or a webinar or even a safe space at work. I talked about the safe spaces for children. Adults need safe spaces too. Adults need to be able to, leave out of a meeting where they may have felt, anxious or stressed or overwhelmed, and go and just breathe and relax and calm down so that my response is appropriate. My response is healthy. My response is in a way that you can receive it at work in the way that it should be, but it still allows me to advocate for myself, to show up for myself, but it'll be in a much more receivable presentation if you are putting these services, offering these services, being open to these services in the workplace, and not expecting me to leave all that stuff at home. Like, just come to work, just bring yourself to work. Well, myself is all these things. It includes my whole self, and that comes to work. But I think if employers do a better job of accepting that and then doing, some things to help us talk through, feel safe, feel heard, because that's really what it's about. I need you to hear me. Maybe you don't understand, maybe you don't do anything with it, but you hear and understand how this comment or this person or, this position has made me feel in this workplace.
All right. And typically we close these out by giving each panelist sort of the last statement that they would like for this group to take away. And one of the things we know at the YW is not about equality. People always talk about equality. It's about equity. And we want to move toward health equity. What is something quickly that you can give us, some nugget that you can give us of something you think is crucial for us to reach this lofty goal of health equity? I'll start with you, Ms. Allen-Robb.
Accountability. And I will say this because we are in the process, the Board of Health is in the process of performing their search for a new director of health. And this is really about community accountability. We get to the place of pulling those levers in power and institutions by holding those who are in leadership accountable. So when it is time for this person to be interviewed and have an opportunity to meet with community, show up and tell this person what you are expecting.
All right, Ms. Franklin.
Yes, because of accountability, that helps those that have the power to move in the right direction. I would also say we tend to think about large P policy change. I think it's small P policy change. I think we have to make sure that in our workforce, because we spend a lot of time with our colleagues and there are issues in the workplace that might not rise to the level of a formal complaint, but those are wearing us down and physiologically, and also for the work that we do in the social justice sector, the public health sector, just for the community good sector. In order for us to do that work and help those that need help, we have to be solid first, we in the workforce. So I'd say take it back to the root cause and the root solutions, and make sure that we don't leave the workplace dynamics and small P policy off the table. That's where we have to hold each other accountable. And those are the courageous conversations that we have in the workplace.
Very good, Ms. Abdallah.
So I would say to be all of us to be curious. So to be more curious about what is happening with ourselves, with our family, with our neighbors, with our coworkers, with people we may supervise or lead, with even strangers. So just to be more curious as to what happened to that person will then hopefully start to lead us to have more of those courageous conversations. And it's not so much about, did I do something? Did they do something? No, it's just about, I'm checking in on my fellow brother and sister. And so be curious about what is happening or has happened to your neighbor, your friend, your family, yourself.
All right, well, thank you so much. Key takeaways, educate yourself. Attending this could be a first start, but don't let it be your last educational experience in this area. Support Black-owned healthcare practices, because sometimes you need those experts to help us to understand what is going on in our community. And attend other events and seminars. There are organizations that are leading this fight, that are working for health equity, which is our goal in this community. I thank all of you. I left out one of our sponsors, the Nissan Foundation, that has been sponsoring us for a very long time for these conversations. And I thank these panelists. Also, if you're interested in knowing more about this area, come to our rally on September 26th so we can continue this important work. It's been a joy to host each of these individuals. Some of you I'm just meeting, but some of you I've known for a while, and I thank you so much for giving us the gift of knowledge, which I always say is something that is never wasted. So thank you very much, and thank you from the YWCA and our mission.